Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is January 5th, 2015. The show is being recorded on January 4th, 2015, but this is the first show of the new year, the first Truth on the Tracks episode of 2015. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things tonight. I want to get into finish up talking about the news that I had mentioned last year in Australia regarding the new anti-terrorism laws there, as well as some issues regarding homeopathy in Australia. So we'll talk about that. I also want to talk about some issues with seed banks here in the United States, as well as the idea of oligarchy in America as well. We're, of course, going to talk about Syria. And I mentioned last broadcast I did here on Truth on the Tracks, that I wanted to mention and talk about a way forward in 2015. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about how activists and how the alternative media can broaden its reach and can make an even bigger impact in 2015. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, I, of course, want to encourage you to check Truth on the Tracks regularly, and you can find the show here at ucy.tv, and it's on Monday nights and Friday nights, I should mention, at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, the Friday night broadcast is a rebroadcast of the Monday night show. The Monday night show is the original broadcast. So ucy.tv, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Truth on the Tracks, Monday and Friday. You can find the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks, and that's where you'll find the links to my more recent articles over there on the left-hand side of the page, some of the archive versions of the show in MP3 format, and also the chat room if you want to chat with like-minded individuals as you listen to the show. That's available on that page as well. I write for a number of different websites, and of course activistpost.com is one of them, also the antimedia.org, naturalblaze.com, and a number of other websites as well that you can check out that I'm a contributor to or even listed as a staff writer for. So there's a number of different websites. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then please go to brandonturbeville.com. And that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the archive versions of this show, all of the YouTube videos, interviews that I do, all of that stuff is there at brandonturbeville.com. And of course you can find the links to the books tab there, and you'll find the contact information, the bio information, and the events tab. All of that stuff is located right there on brandonturbeville.com. It's pretty easy to navigate. Now, we should look at the way forward. Let's just go into that immediately. I think I've seen pretty universally in terms of watching other people talk, whether it's activists or researchers or just people out in the general world. 2014 has not been a good year. 2014 has been a year of frustration, has been a year of regression, has been a year of sadness and death for many people, as you can talk to a great many people out there. Much tragedy has occurred in 2014, and from the activist perspective, not much has happened in a positive light. In fact, can't really think of anything that's happened in terms of being positive in 2014. Maybe some of the listeners can remind me if I'm not remembering the proper occurrences, but I think that I can safely say that 2014 for just about everyone has been one that has been trying in terms of activism, in terms of finances, in terms of personal lives and spiritual lives. It's all been very difficult for the last year. And as much as I can say that I'm not a huge fan of being out in the streets drunken and slobbering and partying over a simple change in a calendar year, for many people New Year's represents a change, a reset button, if you will. And if that's the case, then let's reset the button. The show is the first in 2015, so let's briefly talk about a way forward. And none of this information is going to be new to any of you who listen to the show regularly. But I feel like the first of the year is a great time to mention it, as people are getting back to the routine and back to the daily grind and looking forward to the new year. Let's discuss this now. Over the last few years, but especially in 2014, I'll address the alternative media specifically. The alternative media, when it first started, was an attempt to reach not only people who already were aware of the situation that we're facing, but it was an attempt to act as an outreach facility. It was an attempt to reach people in the general public who were not aware that anything was actually wrong with their society. It was an attempt to tell people about the Federal Reserve. It was an attempt to tell people about 9/11. It was an attempt to tell people about the police state and bring them in and inform them. Now, the alternative media was very much lacking in solutions, as it still is. We have done a lot to change that, I think, but regardless, what it was at one point was an attempt to not only compete with the mainstream media, but it was an attempt to bring new people in. It was an attempt to reach the general public. It was evangelical in a way. It went out and tried to bring new people in that hadn't heard this information before, but it stopped. That stalled. It stalled a couple of years ago, and it has gotten worse in 2014, where the alternative media is not so much interested in outreach and is not so much interested in breaking through the mainstream media and getting information out on the mainstream as well as on the alternative circuit, but and not in terms of getting information out to new people. How do we reach new people with this information? It became more and more of a competition within the alternative media. So in other words, it would preach to the choir, and out of that pool of the choir, the alternative media outlets would compete for listenership, for readership, for sales, whatever. And I think really that's a pathetic situation. The alternative media, yes, it should function as a news reporting organization, and it should act as this parallel to the mainstream, this alternative to the mainstream. It's an alternative media. It's alternative to the mainstream, and eventually one day hope to become the mainstream in terms of, not in terms of ideals, but in terms of listenership. But the problem is, it has not made the effort that it needs to make to reach out to people who don't know the information to begin with. It has become a circle jerk of alternative media outlets doing nothing but competing for the fastest reporting, which is fine, but that's all it's become. The fastest reporting, the most clicks on a website, the most listeners on a website, the most money that can be made. And if that's the sense, well, you're on your way to becoming the mainstream media. You're well on your way to becoming the mainstream, because you're well on your way to becoming nothing but tools for advertisers and tools for corporations and money interests. And, of course, not really concerning yourself with the ideals. And we're concerned with the ideals here. This is why I don't constantly sell stuff on this show or beg for money, although I could use it if you want to send some. Feel free. But that's why I don't make this really a money-making venture. I wish I could figure out a way to make money at it. But regardless, this is the situation that we find ourselves in. Is the alternative media is constantly competing with one another to be a big fish in a small pond. Well, what we're trying to do here is trying to be big fish in a big pond, right? We want to not only compete with the mainstream, but we want to reach new people in the process. Now, years ago, the alternative media specific outlets, especially, which I'm not going to get into any names in this entire discussion here, but we're encouraging people to pass out DVDs for free, or pass out flyers, or just go up to talk to people in general. And I think that's a great idea. Unfortunately, that stalled. That really stalled, and not just in specific outlets, but it stalled across the board in terms of people going out and handing out DVD documentaries, or handing out flyers, or handing out what bumper stickers, or whatever they were handing out, going out and talking to people. doing public viewings, talking and just holding talks and that sort of thing. It's stalled. What you see now is this idea that you have big conventions and big conferences where people in the alternative media pay to hear people in the alternative media say the same things that they say in the alternative media all the time. That sounds incredibly boring to me, but it's good work if you can get it. You can get a bunch of alternative media people who have a hard time finding people of like minds in their area. They can travel and pay for ticket stubs and to get into your conference, and then maybe they'll sign up to your newsletter or something, and the promoter makes a wad of cash. Well, that accomplishes nothing. Conferences within your own little area of expertise, they really, from my experience, don't accomplish anything, because all they are is the presentation of material that's been rehashed. You could have sat at home and listened to it on YouTube and got just as much. It's fun to go and interact with one another, which you don't even do, by the way, and I'll mention that in a minute. But nothing ever comes from these things, and it doesn't bring anyone from the general public in, and that's what the alternative media needs to be focused on doing, is bringing people from the outside in. Outreach. Again, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if it's getting your radio show on an AM station just so it can reach people out in the community who haven't been aware of this information that we discuss before. I don't care if it's handing out homemade flyers that you printed off on Microsoft Word on your own printer and you're handing them out on the street corner, or if you're burning up DVDs and handing out DVDs to people, or just putting stickers up, or just walking around to people and talking to them, giving talks, having DVD viewings. I don't care how you do it, as long as you're doing it, because it does have an effect, and it was having a tremendous effect a couple of years ago, and then it stalled. It stopped being about the alternative media stopped being about reaching people and bringing new people in, and it started being about competition with one another. And this is what stalled it, and this is why the whole, you see over the last couple of years, you see the quote-unquote movement stalling. So we've got to start back over. We've got to hit the reset button, and we've got to start reaching out to other people, not reaching in, not competing for the people that are already there, but we need to bring more people in. So I encourage you, whatever you are able to do, you should do it. DVDs, flyers, giving talks, I don't care. If you're comfortable, if you like public speaking, then and you're knowledgeable about these topics, then start giving talks. If you are more comfortable handing out DVDs and moving on, then do that. If you aren't comfortable doing any of those things, if you're an introvert and prefer to do things anonymously, then figure out a way to do it anonymously and do it. And I don't just mean internet stuff. I don't mean internet stuff. I mean, internet's great for meeting new people and discovering more information and connecting and researching. It's great. It's wonderful. But people, you've got to connect with one another face to face. You've got to talk to people and actually involve yourselves in human interactions. So what I'm asking you to do is do something non-internet related. You can promote the websites, of course, but do something that's personal, even if you have to do it anonymously. Figure it out and do it. We can't waste any more time. We can't waste any more time with the people who want to compete with one another and be the David Rockefeller of the alternative media. We're not interested in that. It's not what it's about. And as soon as you become the David Rockefeller of anything in the alternative media, in my opinion, that makes you the enemy. It's not a good guy. Now, also, I mentioned the conferences. I just want to point this out. Year after year after year, the alternative media groups put on different types of conferences, right? There's conferences, there's speaking events, there's festivals, all this kind of stuff. And I don't care what side of the world it is, what type of perspective it may be, whether it's anarchy conferences or libertarian conferences or Marxist conferences and progressive conferences, 9/11 truth conferences, doesn't matter. You get these conferences and you get hundreds of people to come from all different areas, And they sit around, and they've all come for this one idea. They've come really to hear the same idea regurgitated to them in public, in person, rather, and that's fine. They've come to hear this information. That's good. There's a speaking event where people can hear it. So they all come out, and you've got hundreds of people who generally will complain that the general public doesn't know anything about anything and that they can't find people of like minds in their area. Well, now here they are in a venue with hundreds of people who share their ideals and share their beliefs. This should be a time where they're just walking around with a pen and paper and shaking hands and saying, hey, my name is John Doe, here's my email address, my phone number, let's stay in contact, let's work together. If nothing else, let's just be friends so we can have people of like minds that we can discuss these topics with and have some kind of outlet for our sanity. But instead they go, they pay their money, they watch the speech, and they go home. And there's no connection. And I think, how pathetic is that? How pathetic is it? Because the listeners to this show will know that I've had issues with Ron Paul's economics. But forget that for a minute, all right? I went to a Ron Paul speaking event when he was running for president a few years ago. It was at Myrtle Beach, and there were hundreds of people packed into this hall, and even Ron Paul got up on the podium. And he said, look around this room. There's hundreds of you. It's not about me. There's hundreds of you here, and you're all in agreement. Most of you are in agreement with the things that I have to say, and you're all libertarians, and you don't want the war, police state. You like the Austrian school. You'll find allies here. And he was telling them to walk around the room and meet each other and stay in contact and build connections and work together and build friendships and again, connections. And after he said that, he finished talking. Everyone bum rushed the stage to shake his hand, and then they went home, and nobody connected with anybody. Out of hundreds of people. Now, if those hundreds of people, if each person there would have talked to at least one person and made a connection, they would have doubled their numbers and doubled their connections, and they would have been able to work together to probably double their numbers the next time he came around to speak. But they didn't. They went home to watch television, to play on the internet, and then complain about how stupid the sheeple are. That's your own fault. If you go to any of these conferences and you don't walk away with at least one connection, then what's the purpose of being there? So I'm encouraging people, especially you crazy people that go to these conferences and don't talk to each other, to start talking to each other. Now, if you're not going to the conferences and you're on the internet, you've got the internet and you've got it for a limited time only. Okay, this is not going to be around. You're not going to hear people like myself on the radio forever. The internet's wasn't given for you. It was created by the Department of Defense, by DARPA. It was put out for a reason. But you're on it, and you're playing on it, and you're giving all your personal information up on it. So while it's there, you might as well take advantage of the positive effects, which means most of you are on Facebook, most of you are on Twitter, most of you are on most of the social media platforms that are out there. And there's no reason that out of the 565 friends you have on Facebook that agree with you and that mock the sheeple and that complain about how no one is awake and no one listens to the truth with the capital T, there's no reason that you can't connect with these people at some point. Now, assuming that you're not totally bent over backwards by the economy and beaten to your knees by not having any money or a job and that sort of thing, let's assume that financially you're able. Let's take that out of the equation, because if you don't have the money to do something, you don't have the money to do something, and I think that's a reasonable excuse not to do it. But let's take the financial situation out of the equation for a minute. There is no reason that you can't meet someone. If you're in Indianapolis and you meet a friend, a truther friend in Chicago, there's no reason you can't send that person a message and say, let's meet in between. Or if they're not even willing to do that, then just go to Chicago. It's not that far. You've got nothing better to do. And build a actual human connection. And what I found is that just because people have the same outlook in terms of politics and in terms of the system that you do doesn't mean that they're generally nice people. I mean, there's good people and there's bad people in the world in general, and there's good people and bad people in every group. So don't think that just because somebody agrees with you that 9/11 was an inside job that they're a good person. A lot of these people are assholes, just like out in the general population. So don't get discouraged if you find out that a lot of these people aren't, Christ incarnate. And if you feel uncomfortable, then bring a friend. Bring a friend. There's no reason you guys shouldn't be able to meet and build an actual human interaction and a human connection with one another. Stop sitting on the internet all day and doing nothing but chatting. Get out there, see the sun, see the trees, see the birds, meet other humans. It's nice out there. It's not all digital. So I want to encourage you all to do that. Now, let's move on. I want to talk about also what the alternative media can do and the activist community, what they can do in terms of actually changing the system. Now, I would encourage you all, anytime you become something that ends with an ism or an ist, that you really research what that is and you stop calling yourself that. Just start using your brains. But if you're going to really be revolutionaries, then there's a couple things that I think that you need to do. And one of them is to stop demanding that everybody who works with you agree with you on every single aspect of every single issue. I don't care if you're a Marxist or libertarian or an anarchist. If you are willing to work with me on a specific issue, then I'll be willing to work with you. That's called a united front, and that's what I encourage people to build. Whatever your issue is, whether it's genetically modified food, whether it's the Federal Reserve, whether it's guns, whether it's the drug war, build a united front on that issue. And it's not just enough to say, we don't like genetically modified food. Here's our united front against genetically modified food because we don't like it and we want it gone. What you have to do is you have to come up with a solution. You'll have to come up with a solution for genetically modified food. And of course, there's going to be debate. Some want to ban it, some just want to label it, some don't want to do anything because that violates the Austrian school. And if you don't want to do anything about it, then there's really no point in bitching about it, is there? But your solution, you're going to have to come up with a number of solutions here. And the solution, of course, would be to ban it. The gun issue, right? You want to end gun laws. Well, it's not enough to just say, we support gun rights. You're going to have to come up with a solution to that. And it's not just eliminate some gun laws. It's not about being in defense of the Second Amendment, because you see, if you're always in the defensive mode, that is a losing strategy. It is guaranteed to be a losing strategy. So you got to go on the offense. You've got to say, we're against an assault on the Second Amendment, and here are our demands. Right? And you eliminate gun laws in general. Okay? And you can approach that on 3 different levels: federal, state, and local. But you've got to have demands. You've got to tell the general public not only that there's a problem in society, right? Use the Hegelian dialectic. There's a problem in society. This is why you should be upset about it, and this is the problem that it causes. And here's the solution. You see, these techniques work both ways. The system uses them, the Hegelian dialectic, for instance, and in an info war, in an information war, you have to use them as well. But it's quite simple. You cannot have a revolution based on fit-throwing and complaining. That only turns the general public off, and it doesn't do anything to encourage them to join you or at least stay out of your way. The economy, for instance. We don't like the bad economy. We don't like not having jobs. We don't like austerity and having things cut. We don't like the economic stagnation that we're in. What's your solution? Oh, we don't have one. Maybe this other solution that we've never tried and we don't quite know how it would work, but because we've allegedly never tried it, we have to experiment with it. What a really poor solution. What a really poor statement that has to represent your movement. The idea here is that you oppose the austerity, you oppose the lack of jobs, you oppose the economic stagnation, and in doing so you demand these specific solutions. Wall Street sales tax, nationalization of the Federal Reserve, that sort of thing. You've got to have it concrete. You've got to have what your demands are. So you know what you want. The people who are observing you know what you want and what you hope to bring about. And the enemy knows what you want and knows what it has to do in order to at least placate you somewhat. So that's another issue. Enough with the complaining. Come up with some real demands. And really demand them. So those are my points for the way forward. And hopefully, again, just for the record, you guys can share my articles left, right, and center. You don't have to ask me if you can share. You can repost. Just give me article, author attribution to the publishing website. And I don't care if you print them off and you give them out for free, or if you send the articles out left and right. If you burn the show down it's on an MP3. You can get it on my websites. You can get it here at ucy.tv/TT. You can burn these radio shows down onto CDs if you want. Give them out for free. You have my permission. Right here, January 5th, 2015. I gave you my permission to give these shows out for free. Try to get the shows on AM stations. There's a lot of AM stations around the country that are going out of business because nobody listens to them because they don't play anything on them all day. There's stations, especially in little rural areas, that are just sitting there. Call them up. See if you can get the show on. Just little things. I challenge you. Once a week, try to reach out to someone who doesn't know this information and try to present it to them. Don't make yourself look crazy. Don't just run up to the most random person and start bitch slapping them with chemtrails and MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff. Try to be reasonable and sane about it. Because to a lot of people that you talk to, this stuff does sound crazy. So you have to kind of ease them into it sometimes. But don't be scared to say something. You've only got a limited time to actually say something. And for all the people out there who are talking about they're just laying low because when the shooting starts they're going to really come out and be Rambo. Well, if you're scared to tell somebody about 9/11 or the Federal Reserve or some economic solutions here in 2015, then I frankly don't believe you've got the balls to stand up and be Rambo when it becomes if it becomes physical. So don't come to me with that. I question your courage. You don't have it now. Why would you have it then? But that's another issue. These are just some of the comments that I wanted to make in terms of going forward, and I wish I had the opportunity to make them last week. But perhaps we'll have even more listeners this week because the New Year's celebration is over. Hopefully everybody's hangover has dissipated by now. So I wanted to go back into some current events. I wanted to finish up on some things I didn't get to talk about last week. Hopefully what I said earlier has some effect. But we talked briefly about the Sydney siege aftermath, right? I have this article, it's up at Activist Post at BrandonTurbeville.com. Sydney siege aftermath. Australian government seeks more anti-terrorism laws. Well, of course, we could have seen that coming, and we did see that coming. You didn't have to look very far to see it coming. But on December 16th, the Australian Parliament was actually hearing testimony by Federal Police Commissioner Andrew Colvin, who, quote, warned of grave implications for terrorism investigations if telecommunications companies are not forced to keep phone and internet data. I could not understate enough that it would have grave implications for law enforcement's ability in this country to investigate, deter, and disrupt potential terrorist acts. He also claimed that new telecom companies enter the market. There's less data being collected, and what data is being collected, they're holding it for shorter periods. It's just all crap, of course. But that inquiry in December 16th came as part of the Joint Intelligence and Security Committee's debate over a third round of oppressive police state laws regarding phone and computer internet data, the data's collection and retention. So the inquiries have conveniently come, but they conveniently came on the heels of the Sydney siege. These lawmakers are asking whether or not these measures could really prevent a lone wolf attack, like what they're calling the Sydney siege. So there's a separate inquiry. There's an inquiry into the inquiry is being requested to determine if these laws could prevent these types of attacks. And the committee is also, quote, set to examine the next package of proposed counterterrorism laws in the very near future. So these committees, some of the major players on the committees, this is Australia, of course, are anything but critics of the implementation of the police state and the surveillance state, because some of these committee members are Director General of ASIO, Director General Duncan Lewis. There are individuals from the Australian Crime Commission, individuals from the Attorney General's office. They're all in favor of the greater police state. They had the first round of anti-terrorism legislation, which passed in Australia in 2014, was the National Security Legislation Amendment 2014. It was Bill number 1, which passed with bipartisan support. The NSLA gave the Australian government extraordinary powers, and this is what taking this from Ben Grubb's article of the Sydney Morning Herald in September, and it says it gives the Australian spy network the power to monitor the entire Australian internet with just one warrant. Journalists, whistleblowers can face up to 10 years in jail for disclosing classified information. So it was the government's first tranche of tougher anti-terrorism bills, right? So it beefs up the powers of ASIO. It passed the Senate by 44 to 12, and it had bipartisan support, big surprise. And basically, anybody, including journalists, including whistleblowers, including bloggers, who recklessly disclose information that relates to a special intelligence operation can face up to 10 years in jail. And of course, any operation can be declared special by an authorized ASIO officer. So this bill also gave ASIO immunity for criminal and civil liability in certain circumstances. A lot of lawyers and academics in Australia are saying that the agency will probably abuse this power. Well, I guess that's why they make the big bucks, right? Because they can tell you that ASIO may abuse this power. Anybody who identifies ASIO agents could face a decade in prison under the new bill. That's a tenfold increase on the existing maximum penalty that was already there. The bill allows ASIO to seek one warrant, just one warrant, to access a limitless number of computers on a computer network when attempting to monitor a target. In other words, this would allow the internet, the entire internet, to be monitored because it's a network of networks, right? And the bill does not specifically define what a computer network is. So in other words, they can use, if they want to get a search warrant for one computer, that's all they need to search the internet. So rest assured, basically this bill is a warrant to search the entire internet and all the computers on that internet. So the ACO will be able to copy, delete, or modify the data held on any of the computers it has a warrant to monitor. So it's able to copy, delete, or modify the data. So the bill also allows ACO to disrupt target computers, use innocent third-party computers not targeted in order to access a target computer. So that bill passed, and then there was a second bill, which was called the Foreign Fighters Bill, submitted shortly after the passage of the bill that I just read, the NSLA. The second bill, this is from the bill itself. I'll quote from the bill itself what it did. Create new offenses for advocating terrorism and for entering and remaining in a declared zone. Broaden the criteria and streamline the process for listing of terrorist organizations. Extend instances in which a control order may be sought. Extend the sunsetting provisions of the preventative detention order and control order regimes, and include a sunset clause for the declared zone offense. Provide certain law enforcement agencies with additional tools needed to investigate, arrest, and prosecute those supporting foreign conflicts. So we now have, that was the second round. Now the third round of laws were being debated shortly, right at the time that the Sydney siege happens. And I guess we can say that this puts the Sydney siege in the same place as the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, the underwear bomber, 7/7, all these other terrorist attacks that were just conveniently timed to take place either shortly before or during bills being discussed that would shred civil liberties, that sort of thing, Patriot Act and all that. So there was a good article by David Marr in The Guardian, and you don't hear me say that very often. But let me read you the 6 paragraphs from this David Marr article. He says, "This will be used to justify so much. Controversial security laws the Abbott government has already passed, the metadata retention law waiting in the wings, and heaven knows what other laws may now be dreamed up in the aftermath of the shocking deaths in the Lent Cafe. Dealing with Manharon Monis never needed fancy new security laws. He's been on the radar of police, and probably ACO, since at least October 2009 when he turned up at a police station in Sydney's western suburbs trying to report a bogus terrorist attack. He was charged instead with writing menacing letters to the families of soldiers killed in Afghanistan. From that point until yesterday's terrible events, police and ACO had all the authority they needed to keep track of a man who revealed himself over the years to be really nasty and really crazy. Old laws allowed police to bug his phones, intercept his emails, and place him under surveillance. They didn't even need a warrant to access his metadata and track down everywhere Monis had been and everyone he was talking to year after year. They didn't need fresh laws threatening journalists with 10 years jail for revealing ACO's newfangled special operations. Look at the superb cooperation the press displayed during the siege, foregoing scoop after scoop to follow the police tragedy of denying Monis the oxygen of publicity. In the months ahead, with due acknowledgement for the skill they showed in the siege, a failure of policing will have to be faced. Despite having all the powers they needed at their disposal, and despite Monis's erratic behavior over so many years, the Australian Federal Police, the New South Wales Police, and ACO weren't able to prevent him putting into effect his crazy plan." Well, exactly. But I think the important point here, one of the many important points that were made, is that the laws were already on the books. The police state laws were already on the books to arrest Monis, to surveil Monis, to listen to his phone conversations, to read his emails, to search his computer, to keep him under constant surveillance. Those laws were already there. They didn't need the new laws. And it also points out that not only were the laws there, it points out that the police and the ACO officers and so forth didn't take advantage of them. So, there you go. Now, for anybody interested in the Sydney siege, I've done an article which is up at Activist Post and BrandonTurbeville.com entitled 5 Reasons to Question the Sydney Siege, and that kind of runs you through some of the issues surrounding the Sydney siege that are questionable in general. So let's stay in Australia for a minute. I want to bring up this other article that's up at BrandonTurbeville.com and ActivistPost.com. Australia silences criticism of vaccines, benefits of homeopathy. Now, when the facts surrounding the safety and effectiveness of vaccines begin to be brought into the light, the only option left for those who manufacture the vaccines and promote the vaccines or force vaccines onto people is to silence the presentation of those facts. So it's also imperative that those same forces prevent the alternatives to vaccination and the, I guess, financially incentivized medical dogma from becoming known amongst the general public. So you got to silence the criticism of the vaccines, and you got to silence the alternative or the existence of the alternative to the vaccines. So this was the mode of attack taken by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission in a case that dated back to 2013 against the homeopathic remedies company Homeopathy Plus. In the early part of 2013, the ACCC instituted federal proceedings against Homeopathy Plus after claiming that the company was guilty of being misleading and deceptive. After the company posted up a series of 3 articles on its website which presented the pertussis vaccine as being ineffective in preventing the disease and that presenting it as largely unreliable, which of course it is, both of those things. You can see my own articles on that. So the Ministry of Truth, I guess we should call the ACCC, the Ministry of Truth, targeted the company also, in addition to all what I just mentioned. They targeted their company due to the claims that homeopathic remedies are a safe and effective alternative to the vaccine. So the ACCC has taken legal action against homeopath Francis Sheffield. Not really sure what that is related to, but that was reported as well. So the ACCC decided to take action against the company months after the company removed the articles in questions. But the ACCC continues to push for an injunction to have the claims removed from the website. In other words, the ACCC is waging an expensive legal battle with taxpayer money to forcibly remove claims from a website which has already removed the claims. So we have other ministers of truth, or ministries of truth, which we in the Western society are replete. The Therapeutic Goods Administration Advertising Complaint Resolution Panel and the Therapeutic Goods Administration have also issued orders of retraction against Homeopathy Plus. So apparently removing the information deemed unsuitable for the field slaves was not enough. The field slaves have to be re-educated in the proper the proper manner and the proper relevancy to the articles. In other words, the field slaves have to be taught what Massa wants them to be taught, and they have to make sure that they actually believe the crap. So they have to go back and be forced to retract the articles and tell the public that the all-knowing Australian government and medical establishment, which are basically the same thing now, which have been, by the way, responsible for a number of unethical experiments on indigenous Australian peoples, as well as the destruction of the indigenous Australian people's lifestyle and cultures. These trusted institutions have to go back and make sure that the field slaves in Australia are told properly what is suitable for their bodies. So Homeopathy Plus refused to comply with the retraction orders of one of these hundreds of government oversight agencies, which don't really oversee anything but the oppression of the Australian people. The ACCC filed its case in Australian federal court. So without surprise, the court sided with the regulatory agencies. In other words, the court sided with the pharmaceutical companies, as it always does, and ruled that the claims of the article were misleading and inaccurate. So the evidence actually suggests, as you can see in my own articles, that the pertussis vaccine is neither safe nor is it effective in preventing whooping cough. But facts never get in the way of government and corporate collusion or politicized science. So we have the court ruled, and this is a quote, "In fact, the vaccine is effective in protecting a significant majority of people who are exposed to the whooping cough infection from contracting whooping cough." Well, thank you, Australian court. Glad you did all those experiments to determine whether or not that was true, because the homeopathy website isn't allowed to make those claims because it's not qualified, but I guess the judge could do that. They heard from their relevant Australian medical authorities that are bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical companies and couldn't do a thing on their own without the money coming from the pharmaceutical companies. So, the court criticized any claims that homeopathic remedies might help in preventing whooping cough. It stated that the articles posted on the company's website made false or misleading representations that homeopathic treatments have a use or benefit in preventing pertussis infection. So we're still waiting to hear on the penalties that will be dished out to Homeopathy Plus for daring to share information that the field slaves who could read might find. For daring to do something so horrible and so dangerous to democracy. We're waiting to see what penalties they'll be facing, and that will come in February of this year. There will be a hearing in February, and there will be the possibility of more injunctive orders that might be issued, and probably will be issued, because this is how those institutions tend to work. They're never short for implementing injunctive orders. So, Syria. We want to briefly mention Syria. Yet again, we've got reports coming that it's coming out of Iranian state media claiming that the U.S. military aircraft have once again dropped weapons into areas held by the Islamic State. So we've got Iraqi volunteers who are fighting against the Islamic State in the Yathrib and Balad districts in Iraq's Saladin province. These are the ones who reported the airdrops. In October, we had a series of airdrops of weapons which conveniently fell into the hands of the Islamic State in Ain al-Arab, which many of you will know as Kobani. Of course, it's interesting, Kobani and Ain al-Arab, they mean the same thing. Ain al-Arab means the Arab Spring, not the color revolution spring, but the spring of the Arabs, basically. That's the name of the town. Kobani is the Kurdish name for the town, and the media chooses to use Kobani. But anyway, there was an airdrop of weapons that was allegedly supposed to go to the Kurdish fighters and the fighters who were resisting the Islamic State in Ain al-Arab, but it conveniently fell onto the side of the Islamic State, and they were able to get the weapons. Then we have a November report coming from Iraqi intelligence sources saying that the U.S. is actively supplying ISIS with weapons. I'll read you the report. It says the Iraqi intelligence sources reiterated that the U.S. military planes have airdropped several aid cargoes for ISIL terrorists to help them resist the siege laid by the Iraqi army, security, and popular forces. What is important is that the U.S. sends these weapons to only those that cooperate with the Pentagon, and this indicates that the U.S. plays a role in arming the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. So, we even had an organization, Conflict Armament Research, which is based in London, reporting that ISIS fighters are using significant quantities of arms, including M16 assault rifles, marked property of the U.S. government. We reported that here. We can't forget that the report that came out back in June, which was actually an old report. The alternative media picked up on this about a year or two late, and it was a big surge of reporting in 2014. But this actually goes back to 2013. The reports that ISIS was being trained in 2012 by U.S. instructors at a base in Jordan, and of course those terrorists who were trained in Jordan were then brought up through Turkey after having been financed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some of the other Gulf state feudal monarchies. And then they were brought in from Turkey into Syria. And all the while, the Israelis were acting as its air force, as a backing force, as cover fire. We even had, we have to go back to this other report here. The U.S., of course, is still claiming that it's only arming moderate mercenaries, vetted mercenaries in Syria to fight against ISIS, but I think we've done this to death, that there are no moderates operating in Syria. I'm not going to go through that again, but I think if you listen to this show, you should know that by now. We also know from reports by the New York Times that the CIA has shipped weapons to Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda affiliated groups in Syria since at least 2012. And of course, really, in all honesty, and it's been coming, those weapons have been coming from the CIA since the very beginning, but we have open admissions that that's been happening since 2012. We also had some of these shipments had 160 military cargo flights by Jordanian, Saudi, and Qatari military cargo planes landing at Esenboga Airport near Ankara and other Turkish and Jordanian airports. They're also reported in arming al-Nusra and other jihadist groups. So we have those reports. So just wanted to mention this briefly. We won't go into it because we don't have much time left, but it's a great article by Cassius Methel. It's up at the Anti-Media. State departments of agriculture are attempting to regulate seed banks out of existence. So he says, last year, Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture officials sent a friendly letter to a seed bank seed exchange group in Mechanicsburg telling them they need to test every variety of seed with extremely impractical and pointless tests to ensure that they are up to standards with regulations. So they are actually claiming that one of the reasons for doing this is agri-terrorism, right? Of course, they don't really explain how agri-terrorism can be applicable here, but they're saying this is the reason that these stupid rules should be enforced on the people there. There's laws in every state regarding the possession and exchange of seeds, but the enforcement of these laws are, it's spotty because a lot of this law is actually too complex and even difficult to decode, and just about again, it's just really complicated. But the idea that there are actually laws regarding the possession of seeds of food crops, this is absolutely insane. Now, if you look back to feudal England or something to that effect, and you look around and you'd see maybe examples of where the slaves weren't allowed to have seeds for, I don't know of any specific instance where this had happened, but I'm saying you can look back and see that this is the type of system that you'd have to have. A feudal system in which the slaves at the bottom couldn't even own their own seeds. This is absolutely unbelievable. John Torgrimson, the executive director of the Seed Savers Exchange, says there's almost no danger. This is not a risk to agriculture in any state. This is not a risk to our food supply. But this is not just happening in Pennsylvania, by the way. There's regulators in Nebraska are also doing that, looking at local seed banks. We have the David Svick, the head of Nebraska's Seed Control Office, says he wants to see how to proceed with the seed banks of the state who are not complying with regulations. And we also have Betsy Goodman, who is a farmer in Nebraska. She wrote an article in her opinion. It says regenerating your own seed is a human right, and she's absolutely right. It is a human right. So Cassius Methel, he writes, in other words, the recent development here is that Nebraska state bureaucrats being paid to enforce laws that only benefit big agriculture wish to proceed with severely limiting the ability for the people to do what they should fundamentally have a right to, collect and exchange seeds. They're trying to proceed with enforcing regulations at any cost. This is fundamentally a move to help stifle the empowerment of these people with their agricultural practices. And he's exactly right as well. Let me read another paragraph from his article. It says, the only real agri-terrorists that exist are corporations like Monsanto who influence laws like this, and bureaucrats paid to enforce and deal with the laws that inhibit people from taking action to be well off with their agriculture. It seems big agriculture corporations support these laws so that farmers will have to annually buy seeds that are patented GM or hybrid instead of harvesting their own seeds to plant. And that absolutely is the case. Maintaining our natural right to simply possess seeds and freely practice agriculture is something we absolutely need to do. It is an overall dangerous position for society to be in, where most of us don't know how to possess seeds, grow food, and survive without a Walmart or Taco Bell. I think in the future this will become more painfully apparent, and people will start cultivating crops again. But when they do, will these departments of agriculture try to stifle it with the laws? We must be opposed to these laws to the fullest in order to guarantee our simple right to be prosperous. And I agree with him 1%. Again, the title of the article is State Departments of Agriculture Are Attempting to Regulate Seed Banks Out of Existence on the Anti-Media. So please check that article out and share it around to anybody who is in the relevant areas, Pennsylvania and Nebraska. But of course, anybody who's in Seed Savers exchanges or Seed Savers organizations should get this information. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, recap the beginning of the show. We talked about a way to move forward, and I hope people will really take those statements to heart, and that I hope that we will start working together more and more, putting petty differences behind us, and start working on areas where we agree, and just moving forward in general. So tonight has been the first show of 2015 of Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.